Greetings and welcome to Your Neighbours Leaders Lunch. It's great to be here with you, and we appreciate you making the time to talk to us. Just to remind you, Your Neighbour we are about 1,300 churches at the moment trying to make a national response from the churches to the strange days that we find ourselves in. So we equip and encourage church leaders by events like this one. We connect people in need with a local church through our nationally based helpline, and we liaise with government and the NHS. But today we are delighted to be joined by my good friend Matt Bird, all the way from Wimbledon. I see he's even emphasising the point with the background, and we're going to be talking about how we can encourage and help local churches engage locally with their local government and increase the impact that we can make together. So, Matt, why don't you introduce yourself before we get started?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for lunch. I guess this is what you call bring your own lunch kind of meeting. So it's good to see you all. Perhaps you could just go to the reactions little button at the bottom of your Zoom meeting and give me a wave or give me a thumbs up just to let me know you can hear me. There we go. Brilliant. And those of you that are being a little bit shy and not showing yourselves, can I encourage you to turn on this? You know who you are. Just click to start the video so I can see. Thank you. There we go. Wonderful. I like seeing you. I'm very happy with noisy, messy backgrounds. Thank you. Somebody else is showing us themselves. The reason I have this behind me is because actually I'm sat in my bedroom in an armchair, and so we're all making adaptations at this time, aren't we? Well, thank you, Marcus. It's great to be on this Leaders' Lunch with you today. I live in a little place called Wimbledon, hence the background, with my wife, Esther, and 3 children. My wife is a teacher in leadership in local schools here in Wimbledon, and I've been a councillor here in local government for a few years, and I lead 2 things. One is I founded Cinnamon Network UK and now run Cinnamon Network International. We're working in 8 countries currently, helping churches to transform their communities, and often helping them transform their communities is about helping them engage with local and national government, and that's what today is all about. As well as Cinnamon Network International, I also lead a small business called Relationology International. And during lockdown, I've pivoted Relationology to online delivery. So I run mastermind groups for leaders who want to work towards a particular goal that matters to them over a 100-day campaign. And I coach and support them in working towards that goal. So that's a little bit about me. Just so I know a little bit more about you, can I invite you to turn on the chat box? So if you go to the bottom of the Zoom call, there's a little speech bubble with the word chat in it. If you click that, on the right-hand side of your screen will appear a chat box. Now I can see your names, but perhaps you can just let me know in that chat box what your day job is. So please just take a few moments. If you're a church leader or a volunteer, or you lead a community group, or perhaps you're involved in government yourself, perhaps you could just take a moment to post in the box there, just so I can get a little feel of who's in the Zoom room today. There we go, part-time church leader. Oh yes, Kelvin, great to see you. Where's your photo? Oh, there you are. Give me the thumbs up. You're on a walk. Wonderful. Design engineer. We've got all sorts of amazing people doing amazing things. So please do post in there. It's really good to see you. Anyway, Marcus, sorry, I'm just kind of stirring the room up so we can see who's here. Perhaps I should hand back to you.
Matt, I wouldn't expect anything less from you, Matt. It's the advantage of working with board leaders is people get on with it. So my first question, and thank you very much, guys, for filling those in. That would be really useful. So I'm going to ask Matt a few questions to tease out some of the main issues from today. And then particularly because we have the advantage of a smaller group, we'd love for you to ask a few questions of Matt and see if we can get some group learning going on. My first question for you, Matt, is what was your journey into politics? I was living in the neighbouring ward for the council that you stood for. So I've actually been in council meetings and watched you work as a councillor. So tell us about that journey, please, Matt. How did you get involved in politics?
Well, you know, I met Jesus Christ in 1989. Gosh, a few years ago. And I met some people who loved Jesus. They were very odd, as some Christians are, but there was something undeniably real about their relationship with Jesus. And so I began to kind of just explore, and I decided I wanted to give it a go with Jesus, and I've been giving it a go with Jesus ever since. But probably about 20 years into my journey of walking with Jesus, I really felt God challenged me to deprivatize my faith. Because one of the tremendous strengths of the Protestant tradition, I don't know if we have any Catholics here, but certainly in the Protestant church, there's a very strong emphasis on personal faith, individual faith, which is really powerful. But the downside, and there is a downside to every strength, is that focus on personal faith can lead to us being quite self-centered and self-indulgent. And I must say that I felt my faith had become quite, focused inwardly about me and Jesus and getting to heaven and taking as many other people with me as I possibly could. And I really felt God challenged me that faith was never meant to be privatized in that way, but we actually have a public faith. And I was reflecting particularly on the words of Jesus when he said, you are the light of the world. No one lights a lamp and puts it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a lampstand and it illuminates and brings light to the whole room. You know, in the same way, let your light so shine before men and women that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. And I was reflecting on that, and I was just thinking, there's nothing private about being the light of the world. It doesn't matter how bright your light is in a dark place, a dingy place, you stand out. And so I began a journey of trying to work out what it meant to deprivatize my faith, to embrace the fact that my faith was like a city on a hill that couldn't be hidden. Not that I wanted to shout about it, but I just wanted to do it. So I didn't know where to start. So I naively decided to join a political party. Doesn't matter which one, particularly it was a mainstream political party. But I thought this would be the beginning of me trying to outwork what it meant to follow Jesus in the real world, in the community around me. And it's a bit like joining the gym, really. I got my membership card, I paid my subscription, and I did nothing with it for about 6 months, very much like joining the gym. And then I decided that I would go and volunteer for my local political group. And Marcus, well, I still live in London Borough of Merton. Marcus was a pastor there. We knew each other before that. But at this time, I turned up at our local political group and simply offered to get involved. And I sat there one Saturday morning stuffing campaign leaflets into envelopes. And after about quarter of an hour, they said to me, Matt, could we have a quiet word with you? I thought maybe I'd been folding the pieces of paper wrongly to go in the envelopes, but they took me into a side room and they explained that there was a local election coming up in the London Borough of Merton. And one of the seats was a no-hoper seat for our party. and they couldn't persuade any of the party faithful members to be the candidate in this seat, because nobody wanted to fight a seat they were guaranteed to lose, although they all clamoured after being in local government. So they said, Matt, what we're looking for is a volunteer. Would you be our volunteer candidate in this particular ward? And they said, if the ballot paper goes out to the community and we don't have a candidate, it reflects really badly on the party. So would you be our paper candidate, simply so that there is a name on the ballot paper? And I agreed. 3 months or 4 months later, on election day, I nearly didn't bother going to the town hall for what they call the count, because what was the point? But I was out with a friend, and I suggested we might go and have a laugh and see how badly I lost. So we turned up at the town hall that night to the count, and finally, in the early hours of the morning, it was like 2 a.m., the chief exec of the London Borough of Merton stood on the platform, Jed Curran, who's still the chief exec, and he started announcing the winners. And he got to my ward, and he announced that I'd won. Now, I'm not sure quite how this happened. Some people think it's because my surname begins with B for bird, so it's at the top of the list of candidates or whatever. But there was a massive swing in this seat, and I was elected into local government as a councillor, and I didn't know what on earth I was doing. I was shocked, but I was not as shocked as the leader of my party, who had just elected a complete stranger into local government. And there was certainly quite a few annoyed party faithful who would have stood for the seat if they'd known there was a chance of winning. But that's how I first kind of got involved in the world of politics as a Christian and follower of Jesus.
Fantastic. I think we both agree that it's incredibly important to have people of faith, people that know Jesus in these kind of positions. I'm really curious to ask though, what's your view on kind of party politics and Christians?
Oh well, let me put it like this. I think everyone on this call should be a member of a political party. Do you agree with that? I'd be interested. Could you give me a thumbs up? Or I don't think there's a thumbs down, but perhaps you can give me a thumbs up if you agree that everybody should be a member of a political party. A few. Okay, well, let me tell you why I think you should. Because, we live in I work all around the world, and in the UK, we live in a very privileged environment where we have the freedom to vote. And there are people that have died for democracy around the world. There are people still dying in the name of democracy around the world. There are women in our history who have fought for the right to vote. And I think that it's incumbent upon us to take our responsibility very seriously, not only to vote, but to be a member of a political party. Because when it comes to choosing candidates, for example, for your member of parliament, you only normally get a vote if you're a member of the party. And I've known candidates for parliament to get selected to be that party's runner in the general election on the basis of a relatively small number of votes. So if you're a member, you get a right to vote on who is your candidate in your constituency. So even if you only join for that reason, I think it's really incumbent upon us to exercise our democratic right, not only to vote, but to be part of a party, and to actually use that vote to select your parliamentary candidate. Do I think that party politics should appear in the pulpit is a slightly different question. Let's just step back for a moment. For me, Jesus was actually very political. I was taught that that Jesus was a spiritual leader, not a political leader. But actually, as I've rediscovered the biblical stories over the years, I've discovered that Jesus was actually political. So if you define politics as the way that we choose to live together as a society, then actually our faith has everything to say about politics. And Jesus's life challenged the political norms and the political culture of his day. He challenged the fact that a woman could be led out of the front door of a house and be stoned by a bunch of men, whilst the man who she was caught in adultery with was allowed to slip away out the back door. You know, that you could heal somebody on any day of the week other than the Sabbath. I mean, there was so much nonsense, political nonsense and political injustice in the New Testament. I mean, what sort of civilized society diagnoses people with an illness and then chooses to isolate them and segregate them from the rest of society in a ghetto? Because that's exactly what happened to lepers. They were diagnosed by religious leaders, and then they were segregated from the rest of society. You know, I mean, Jesus challenged that. He touched lepers. He healed lepers. There's so many cultural, political taboos that he broke. And so for me, Jesus is a very political leader, because Jesus and Christian faith have everything to say about how we live together as a society. What I think is unhelpful is that when we get party political. So when I preach a lot all over the world and speak at conferences, I am never, ever party political in that role, but I am always political. I am always encouraging people to exercise their right to vote, to join a party, to vote for parliamentary candidates, and to engage in the political process, because that's what makes democracy work.
Absolutely. Some really interesting points in that, Matt. I'm sure we might pick up on some of those later. Let's move to how do churches get involved in local government and make that work? I know that with the cinema networks, you set up the Faith Action Audit, which I thought was a phenomenal tool. Would you like to tell us about that, please, Matt?
Yeah, there are lots of ways that local churches can begin the journey of political engagement. And you know, there's a couple of tools that Cinnamon that we've developed, and one of them is the Cinnamon Faith Action Audit, and it helps churches in a local government area work together to measure their social impact and the value of that social impact in the community. You see, as churches, we are led by professional storytellers. We are great at story, but we are not very good with numbers and metrics and outputs and outcomes. And if we want to engage in the public square, if we want to engage with civic leaders and civic institutions, then we need to speak their language, and their language is not language of story. Their language is numbers and metrics. So I always talk about Cinnamon helping the church to become bilingual, to learn to communicate the value of what they do, not just with story, but with numbers. And the Cinnamon Faith Action Audit captures the economic value of what the churches contribute in a local government area at a moment in time. Now, you can go on the website. Let me put the website up now. It's cinnamonnetwork.com. And you can find out a lot more about it. But actually, just having a headline figure for the value of what the church contributes in the community gets the attention of civic leaders and civic institutions, and perhaps for the first time ever helps them to realize the contribution that your church makes and other churches make in the life of the community. So in the UK now, we've supported churches in 92 local government areas to measure their impact. Cinnamon now, this year, we're supporting churches in the United States, in South Africa, in the Netherlands, in Denmark, in Australia, also to begin to measure the value of what they contribute in the life of their city. And once you have this number, you see, you get the attention of civic leaders. In one city in the UK, they hosted a public event to announce the results. And the leader, the chief executive of the city government, was asked to comment. And they started by expressing their amazement about how much the church in the city was doing, and about which they knew nothing beforehand. And then they said, we'd love to work with you as the churches, but we've got a problem. That is, there are so many of you, we couldn't possibly coordinate working with you all. So remember, this is a public meeting with all the church leaders and civic leaders and dignitaries. And so the chief exec says, do you think you might work together as one church in our city? And there are a lot of very embarrassed pastors sat in the room who at that point could only nod and agree.
Fantastic. Yeah, I can almost feel the embarrassment in the room for them. So one of the, we worked together on Merton 316, which was our local group of churches working together. And one of the things I was always impressed at was the level of speakers that we were able to get in to talk to pastors. I mean, we had the chief of police, we had the MP, we had the mayor, we had the leader of the council, and the council chief exec over the course of a couple of years. How do churches, preferably together, if not individually, go about building those relationships to be able to make the most and get some, and partner with the council?
Yeah, well, Marcus, it's very, very sophisticated and complicated. And I'd like to take an hour now to explain this complicated strategy. You know, that's tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah.
That's tongue-in-cheek.
So it basically boils down to ask, right?
So the complicated strategy is what I call the coffee strategy. That is, you phone somebody up or write to somebody and you say, I'm a leader in the local community and I would love to meet you for a cup of coffee to talk about ways that we might be able to work together. That's it. That's it. You don't need to read any books. You don't need to go to any seminars. Just reach out to your mayor, your chief executive, your leader of the local council, your police commander, and say, could we have a coffee to chat about the community? You see, because what all those people need are stakeholders like us. Their ability to engage in grassroots community is delivered by people like us. So you may think they won't have time for you. Trust me, they will have time for you if you simply ask them for a cup of coffee. Now, what makes the difference is if you can write to them and say, actually, my name's Marcus Bennett and I lead the Huddersfield Church Leaders Network or Merton 316 or whatever you call it. And actually once a month, church leaders from across our community meet together to talk about how we can serve the community, and we pray for it as well. If you can write in a way that you're not just approaching them as an individual, but you're approaching them as a network of stakeholders, you'll be irresistible, because they need grassroots connectedness. And if you happen to be strongly engaged across the diversity of your community, you'll get even more traction. So the cup of coffee strategy, firstly, involves inviting for a cup of coffee. If you can do it in the name of a network, doesn't matter what the network is, but as a group of others, great. And if you can ensure that your network is diverse, and if it isn't, you need to do something about that. I've always found getting my black leader friends to an all-night prayer meeting, they will do at the drop of a hat. But getting them to a breakfast prayer meeting is quite difficult. So you need to think about the really practical things, like when does your network meet? Because if it meets meeting at particular times excludes particular sorts of people. Meeting in the middle of the day, for example, assumes that church leaders are full-time employed, and they're not. I mean, I know some people on this call, you're a portfolio worker, you lead a church and you've got a job. And how do you balance those things out? So just think very carefully about when you host and how you host your meeting, because when you do it and how you do it will include or exclude other people. So coming back to my point, diversity matters very much for civic leaders. So if you have genuine diversity, then make sure you communicate that as well.
Absolutely. The last church I led in Dewsbury, I asked the CDMP just to kind of say, how can we help? Got 20 minutes, and from that 20 minutes from her, we opened all kinds of doors for us. She gate crashed the launch of our Street Angels project to say thank you, which is just like, the MP gate crashed our meeting. That was quite something. So let's talk about, we are the church, right? So we pray, we preach, we pray for people, we do stuff. There's a sort of a suspicion that the local government treats that with suspicion. And I know the Cinnamon's done a whole bunch of stuff on prayer breakfasts and civic prayer breakfasts. And could you give us some wisdom on how we can feel like we're being ourselves and partner with the local church?
Yeah, great question. So one of the other things, as Marcus has indicated, is that we've developed a civic prayer breakfast model. Basically where the churches in a local government area work together to host a prayer event. This isn't a civic service, this is a prayer event, but you don't host it in a church, you host it at the town hall. And so we've developed an approach, a methodology for helping church leaders work together to pray for the transformation of their community. And if you want to know more about that, I'll give you a link before we wrap up today. But actually going to a leader who you know or are getting to know and saying to them, what is it that keeps you awake at night?
Good question. Great question.
Where are your resources most strained and stressed? Because we would love to do something to help. We'd love to pray, but we also would like to mobilize the churches to help. And following your coffee strategy to approach it like that is very, very effective. And then saying, well, actually, we're hosting a civic prayer event in the town hall on this particular date. Would you like to come? People who are not necessarily people of faith will turn up at things like this. And I've invited members of parliament and police chiefs, police commanders, to all sorts of events over the years where they're happy to be amongst people of faith to pray. And all these things help build the relationship. If you say, look, as the churches in London Borough of Merton or wherever, we're looking at measuring our impact, is that something that you'd be interested in? The answer is going to be yes. But then you can begin a conversation about how can we work together? So that city I told you about where the chief exec of the government said, we'd love to work with you, but there are so many of you. Do you think that you could work together? What happened next was the churches formed a network. and created a single point of contact between the local government and the churches in the city. So now the churches could coordinate and act as one in relation to the city. The next thing they did was they asked the city government, what are the things that keep you awake at night? And they came up with 5 things. And they were all things that mattered to the churches. So now the church and the city are working in partnership to address some of those things. It may be around finding foster parents and adoption parents. It may be around antisocial behavior of young people. It may be around homelessness. And, you know, there are lots of issues that come to the surface, but it's about taking the time to ask, what are the most pressing issues? What keeps you awake at night? And then in response to that, offering to pray, offering to help, and beginning a relationship where actually you don't meet for coffee once, but you meet regularly for coffee. And actually, once you've built their trust, you say, well, actually, would you come and speak to our pastors' meeting on Thursday evening or Wednesday morning breakfast? And like we discovered in Merton, Marcus, they turned up and they were delighted to come and meet 10, 15, 20, 25 pastors and not only tell them what they were doing, but also to say, you know, tell us what your opinions are. Tell us what you're finding in the community.
Yeah, I remember that there was kind of 2 categories. Often there was the campaign stop, which was slightly frustrating, but more often than not, people they were genuinely interested in what we were doing and bringing the churches on board. So I'm going to give everybody an opportunity to ask Matt a couple of questions in a minute. I've got one more question from me. But if you want to put them into the chat, that just helps us manage it. And obviously we'll call on you and let you ask your question. But Matt, we've talked a couple of times about building that network across churches in an area, which is clearly key to dealing with and making the most of the local government. Lots of different cultures, lots of different theological preferences in that. Any pearls of wisdom on how local leaders can help navigate that, not just the guys trying to run the network, but as a local leader, as part of a network, how do we help build that and make it strong while being ourselves and not annoying people theologically?
Yeah, it's a tough one to navigate. So I have found over the years that people come together around Jesus and they will come together for the community, but every other issue can be divisive if you let it. So I always say, you know, there are lots of other things that really matter to us about church governance, church leadership styles, your view on some moral issues. We will all have strong opinions on because they are things that matter to us. However, at this table, at the table of unity, we come together around the person of Jesus Christ and a desire to serve our community. So I find it really helpful to say that to leaders and to say we're actually coming together, you know, around Jesus and the community. And we all have different worship styles. We have different leadership styles. We have different views on sexuality. But this is not the place for those things. This is a group that's coming together for the benefit of the community. And so, you know, it's tough navigating. But in Merton, Marcus, we managed to get the Anglicans who were reformed, you know, really reformed, and were separate than the Church of England, and the vicar who was in a civic relationship, meeting together regularly and praying together in the same room. That was a small miracle. But you need to be kindly firm, kindly gracious, and say this is actually bigger than any of us. This is about the community. So, you know, we could talk a lot about navigating those theological issues, but the best way is to create a table that's about Jesus and the community, and everything else gets left at the door.
Yeah, no, great. um, great answer. And some of those the breadth of those relationships in Merton was amazing. But we kept having to say, this is about Jesus, it's about the community, and people kind of came together from that. I've got a great question from Claire. If you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question, Claire, that'd be great. Thank you.
So from a sort of practical and strategic perspective, how do we engage our church in the needs of the local government?
Yeah, great question, Claire. Marcus, am I able to share my screen?
Vinya, could you make that adjustment, please? You should be able to in a minute, he says, hopefully. Vinya's not actually wandered off.
Okay, let me try.
Does it work now?
Okay, try now, mate.
Brilliant. Yeah, I can do it.
Thank you, Vinya.
So I'm sharing a little model with you here, Claire, and you can quickly scribble this on your pads, or you can get it when I give you a free book before the end of today. And these are 5 questions that we help local churches ask. One is, what are the needs and resources of the community? 2, what are the needs of civic institutions, and where are they strained and stressed? And the best way to do that is to meet for a coffee and ask them, what keeps you awake at night? The 3rd question is around commerce. What social responsibility priorities do local businesses have? And where is their alignment with the church? 4thly, what assets, resources and capabilities does your church have it can offer on a sustained basis? And 5thly, therefore, what is Jesus calling you to do? So I use this model a lot with churches, Claire, and let me just come off screen share for a moment. If you go to this web address, you can get a free ebook that explains that model in a bit more detail than I did there. But I think it's about listening, it's about watching, it's about asking questions in those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 areas and finding where the convergence is, Claire. So it might be great for you to say, oh, well, let's run a food bank. Well, if your people in your community don't need food, there's no point in running it. Or if you want to run an antisocial behaviour project, but there's already a group of churches running one, you don't want to duplicate it. So I think approaching this in an intelligent process, through an intelligent process really helps. And that little model we use all around the world for helping churches work out what the needs of the community are, what the needs of local government are, what the needs of business are, and what's the role of the church in the midst of that.
Fantastic. That's what you call a thorough answer. Thank you, Matt. So
Thank you.
We're going to ask Suzanne Kelly over the other side of the Pennines from me in Salford to ask her question, please.
Hi, Matt.
Hi.
I'm in the Trafford local authority, and we're very fortunate because Roger Sutton is chair of the Strong Communities Board in Trafford, and there's been a huge lot of work done about engaging the voluntary sector and the faith sector in responding to local community needs. And we've got very good forums, meetings, collectives. We're establishing a VCSC wellbeing collective. We stood up community hubs really quickly. Yep. And that was something that our church was able to be part of. And I just wondered, how much do local authorities share different models that are working well about engaging the voluntary, the third sector? So if Trafford feels I feel it's a very good model, but I don't know, is there better models? Do you know? I imagine with Roger being the chair, it certainly is a good model. But can you either comment whether or not that is good practice, or are there better ones elsewhere? How do they share?
Yeah, well, it sounds great. I think what's the important thing to say is one size doesn't fit all.
Mm-hmm.
And but I do think that local governments themselves are not very good at sharing models of best practice.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that Cinnamon does is to capture those stories and to tell them and share them with others. They might be inspired to action.
Yeah.
But I think the important thing is that, you know, local authorities are run by people with different approaches and they have different structures. So I think, you know, let's be inspired by what other people are doing, but
Mm-hmm.
let's outwork what it means in our setting. But I think starting with a basic desire to collaborate is really important.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I share one other model with you? This is also in the ebook. Thought I'd finish with that. Make sure I get the English version. Here we go. So, oops.
Yeah, because we don't read Albanian very well, Matt. Just as a rule of thumb.
I have all my stuff in different languages. So, Susan, this is what I call the church unity ladder.
Mm-hmm.
In some areas, churches compete. The relationship they have with one another is competitive. They compete with members. They compete over the bells and whistles that their Sunday show provides. And they don't, and sometimes they don't speak very nicely about each other. I'm sure that doesn't happen in any of our communities. The next rung is what I call the level of cooperation. And this is where church leaders, you know, meet together, build relationships with one another, and will meet together and even pray together and actually speak nicely about each other and be in the same room together. That's cooperation. The third rung is what I call coordination, which is where churches recognize that no church is big enough to do everything. So let's at least coordinate who was doing what. And this is where we got to in Merton, Marcus, where different churches led different community projects and different community ministries. The fourth rung is what I call collaboration. This is where churches recognize there are some things that they can do together, they can't do apart. So a faith action audit would be one of those things. You know, we don't help single churches to do a faith action audit. We will only work with a collective of churches. Civic prayer breakfasts. Civic leaders are not going to turn up to a prayer event run by one church. You know, this is something really powerful you can do collaboratively. And then the fifth rung is what I call coalition, which is where churches realize that they can do something together transformationally. So, for example, at the peak of the European refugee crisis, churches in some communities around the world, particularly around Europe, agreed they would form a coalition to welcome and help resettle refugees. Coalitions have worked around COVID-19. We've seen a lot more partnership working amongst churches during COVID-19 than we did beforehand. So this is what I call the church unity ladder. And there are behaviors and attitudes that are either like snakes that build disunity and distrust. And there are also attitudes and behaviors that build unity and trust. So I use this model a lot when I get a bunch of church leaders in the room to say, actually, where are we today on the rungs? Where were we and where do we want to go? And what are the behaviors and attitudes that we have that are either going to be ladders or going to be snakes? So it's a great little workshop to do with a crowd of church leaders. And I unpack that more in the ebook as well. I hope that's helpful, Suzanne.
Yeah, that's great. One of the things in our VCSE collective, I think our church is the only church that's represented. So I know that there's obviously a forum to get involved. What I think my heart is as well is to look at getting more of the churches involved in that, because we're looking to grow that. We've got a grant in order to establish its governance, increase its membership and its effectiveness. And we're working on that coalition of partners, which really we're calling it like a proof of concept that's happened during the COVID-19. So as you said, all of these agencies have come together and had a working model to provide care in the community around their specialism. And I think now is the time as well to actually, if they're looking to increase the membership, if we can maybe have a lead church that goes out to the other churches in the areas to say, would you like to come and be part of this and have influence in that?
Yeah, great.
Absolutely. So I think we have one final question from Gareth, who makes the observation. One of the things about lockdown is it's shine a light on all kinds of interesting problems that existed and most of us were wildly unaware of. So Gareth, do you want to ask your question, please, mate?
Great. Hello, Matt. Nice to see
Gareth.
you. Hello. Just wondering, one of the most significant parts of this period has been the Black Lives Matter issue that's been brought up. How has that affected your work within the community over the last couple of months?
Gosh, that's a huge question.
I know, sorry.
Very, very, very important question. I mean, within Cinnamon, I've always fought very hard for diversity and inclusion, and have often been told by others, particularly from the BAM community, Black, Asian, minority ethnic community, that Cinnamon is one of the most diverse networks, which I don't take for granted or relax on for one moment, but count as a great compliment. You know, diversity doesn't happen by accident. There is such a thing as white privilege, and you know, some people think, well, what has this issue got to do with me? If you are wondering what this issue has got to do with you, that betrays your white privilege. And so we're working very hard. We're just about to make some changes in Cinnamon Network US, for example. We're just changing board chair, and we're looking at the possibility of having co-chairs, a black chair and a white chair. We're doing the same with our advisory council in the US. We're looking at can we model reconciliation and partnership in all that we do. I mean, I'm a member with my family of a very white Anglican church, but I'm also an honorary elder of a black Pentecostal church in the East End of London, where I'm the only white face. So I just really want to underline, diversity doesn't happen by accident. And I think the Black Lives Matter, what happened with George Floyd has brought to the surface huge amounts of pain that's been growing for years and years and years, and it's brought it to the surface. And many of my black friends and the black communities I'm connected with are just deeply hurting right now. And I think it's absolutely imperative that each of us goes out of their way to build relationships with people unlike us. Yeah. Because that doesn't happen by accident. It has to happen intentionally. And can I just say, building a relationship with somebody unlike you takes more time, takes more effort, is more uncomfortable, it's more challenging, but it's the only way ultimately that we will overcome the prejudices that we all have, because interpersonal relationships break down prejudices, not just black and white, but young and old, rich and poor, of gender, of every different strand of diversity. Only interpersonal relationships break down the prejudice that we all carry. So a big question, Gareth, but I think we must, like never before, lean into this issue, and we must ensure that our churches and our organizations reflect the communities they serve. And if they don't, we need to take radical action, because there have been too many voices and views that have been marginalized and pushed to one side and not heard for too long. And that's how we end up with a racist society and racist institutions and a racist culture.
Well, good answer. I'm aware that we've already overrun, so apologies for that. I just one final question. My apologies, my dyslexic brain has no hope of trying to pronounce your name, my brother. Could you introduce yourself and ask your question, please?
Thank you so much, Marcus. And thank you, Matt. I'm Akpo. I'm a pastor of one of the churches of the Redeemed Christian Church of God, RCCG.
Wonderful.
Yes. Thank you for your presentation. I'm your fan. I've got your book.
Hey.
Yes. I think I got it at Jesus House in one of their mandate conferences, 2016.
Elevation.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm currently just doing some work, and it's on my desk. To the question I have, how did you develop your world views on issues that affect your core beliefs?
Can you just
Is that
repeat
clear
the
enough?
question, Akpo?
Yes. How did you develop your world views? How did you develop your world views on issues that affect your core Christian beliefs? For instance, me as Christian leaders and as a face in politics, as a face up there are some issues that come up that are very tricky, that you are careful to take a stand as a believer. So how did you fit in at the same time you still maintain your Christian faith?
Okay, I've got you. So a couple of things. One is, in all my time in politics, and I've been a councillor in local government, I've co-chaired a 10 Downing Street advisory group, I've done lots of things in the world of politics. I have never, ever, ever felt that I have had to compromise my beliefs in any way. I've always felt like even if my views weren't welcome, I shared them in a very gracious way, because my view matters as much as your view matters. So I would encourage you, Akpo, that actually I think the bigger problem is we're not engaging enough, rather than we're engaging and becoming subsumed in the culture. Does that make sense? I think the biggest challenge is the lack of engagement rather than over-engagement. But for me, I've always been trying to be courageous about my faith. So I nearly said it earlier, but I'll say it now. I have a view, I call it being faith-based, not faith-biased. So when I'm working with political leaders, police leaders, business leaders, I always say we're faith-based, but not faith-biased. We're faith-based because Jesus motivates us to love and care and serve people. But we're not faith-biased because we serve people indiscriminately of who they are, regardless of whether they have faith or no faith. And I find that just reassures civic leaders that actually, whilst our faith is at the core of who we are and what we do, actually we're going to serve everybody. And I find that is one of the biggest fears they have, that we're just in this for ourselves.
Yeah, no.
It's helpful.
Brilliant. Great answer. Thank you for that question, Pastor. I'm aware we're over time. I just wanted to mention that your neighbour is launching a toolkit to help churches engage with their local government. The launch is tomorrow morning. There's still space if you want to get on to be part of that. And I've seen a sneak preview. If I was still pastoring, I'd be reading that on Tuesday and taking it to my leaders meeting on the Monday. So I think it'll be very helpful for you. Matt, you've mentioned an ebook a couple of times. Would you like to just tell us about that before we close?
Yeah, it's called Church-Led Community Transformation. It does what it says on the tin. You can find it at this web address. Go to this web address, put your email in, and it will get sent to you. It also means you join our newsletter. If you don't want the newsletter, just unsubscribe next week. It's as easy as that. But the ebook is something you should grab. We're actually, after the summer, we're actually publishing it with those graphics in it. But at the moment, it just has the explanations. But it's there. It's a free gift from me to you. I hope you'll go and get it and join the Cinnamon story.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. We will make sure that goes out on an email as well. Vidya, could you grab that address, please? So that all remains for me is to say thank you very much for everybody. Matt, thank you so much. Apologies for overrunning, but I'm assuming that it was inspiring. Plenty to go and think about. So God bless you guys. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Take care. God bless you.